Hi there, this is Michelle from Indie Author Blueprint, and today we're talking about the question, I can do it all myself, right? You might initially believe that you can handle all the aspects of publishing yourself, but several factors could help you realize where you may not be qualified. And if you've listened to other episodes, you're like, why are you beating this to death? It's because my analogy is this. If you needed to have knee surgery, would you YouTube it all? Would you expect one staff person to know how to do anesthesia and surgery and billing and the room cleaning? There are different professionals for each step of the process. And one of the mistakes that indie authors make when they're doing their books is thinking that they can DIY everything. You can't do all of it. Some people can do most of it, and they can do a lot of those steps, but you need to know where you have the gaps. I design other people's books, so I design my own, but I hire an editor because I know I can't see my own mistakes. I can spot a self-done book, and in a future episode, I'll go over some examples of how I know when something has been self-published. But for now, let's consider what stands out that makes a book subpar if you don't hire professionals. And then after this episode, I'm going to be going into some of the specific steps of self-publishing. But right now we're talking about that planning process and what do I do with the steps that I can do and the ones that I can't. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is quality comparison. Compare your work to work that is done professionally. And sometimes doing this can highlight the differences in quality. And sometimes I feel that people are a little bit blind to where their gaps are. So I have seen people who think they know how to spot a well-done book. And I have noticed when I see people analyze some things that they really can't. So your friends are going to tell you something's lovely because they don't want to hurt your feelings. But a poorly designed book can really affect your sales. So when you look at it, cover designs might lack visual impact, or the interior might not look polished, or the headings are weird and the page numbers are missing, or something like that. And it can be a wake-up call if you've skipped the quality stuff. And when you compare, if you are trying to lay it out yourself and you look at a book that's been published by a well-known publisher, you're going to see a difference. If you can't spot the difference, then you might have to have somebody else give it a look and just kind of do a checkup on it and say, yeah, I don't know about that part of it. The other thing that you can look at that will help you to know is reader feedback. And if you published a book and you're getting a lot of negative reviews or constructive criticism from readers about the book's design or the editing or the layout, that is a clear indicator that some professional skills are needed. And so I've seen some really negative reviews on Amazon, and it affects future sales. So it's going to affect your marketing and it's going to affect future books that you publish. And so these are the quality comparison thing and the reader feedback are really important. Now, the other thing that you want to look at when you're trying to decide if can I do it all myself is the complexity of each task. Once you get into the details, you might discover that aspects require special knowledge or tools or expertise. I'll give you an example. On a cover design, it's not just about having a good eye. There's also some color profile things you need to know. Amazon's going to want your file in a format where you have flattened the transparency and where you have CMYK on the 4-color format, and you're going to need to have all of your images in high resolution, at least 300 DPI. And if all of that sounded confusing to you, that's a really good sign that you might not be able to DIY your cover. Because when you upload, one of the things I see is people are like, I'm stuck in the publishing process. I don't know what's happening. And what they didn't even realize is that they needed to have their front and their back and their spine all in one complete file, and that it has to be set to the spine width that matches your page count. And so you can make your cover, but then you can't finalize it until you know what your page count on your book is. And then you're going to need to know what color paper you're using, because one color paper is a little thicker and it's going to affect your spine. And so when you look at the complexity of just the cover, you start to dive into those details and you realize, oh, this isn't quite as simple as just taking Canva or something like that. I need to know, how do I get it into that 4-color? How do I get it into the professional specs that it needs to have so that when I send it in to get published, I don't end up with a cover that looks really bright on my screen, but it looks really dingy and weird when I get the cover sample back. So the complexity of those tasks is what's going to help you decide if you can do it yourself or if you can hire it out. Now, another thing that's going to help you decide is an awareness of the industry standards. This is the expectations like cover design and editing, that the professional criteria that somebody would be looking for. And this would include like retailers. So let's say you want to take your book down to a local bookstore that will do some consignment, because that's generally how it kind of works. Like, what would happen if I consigned 10 copies with you or something like that? Or maybe you're taking a sample down to the local bookstore to see if they'd like to buy 10 copies to sell. When you put that in their hands, they're a bookstore owner, so they know what the industry standards are. They know what the books on their shelf look like. They love the smell of books as much as we like it. And they like the feel of books. And so when your book looks and feels like the other ones, they're like, hey, can I hang on to this and look at it and give it an evaluation? But if the first impression says, oh yeah, that doesn't really meet industry standards, then you're not going to be able to sell your book there. So you really want to understand what they're looking for. Wander around a bookstore a little bit and really look, because then you're going to have a better idea of what you need to do if you're trying to do it yourself. Now, the last thing that is important for you to think about that will affect whether you do it yourself or not is professionalism and branding. When you realize that your book is a product and it represents your brand, it might push you to decide that I need to make sure this meets a specific professional image. If you're trying to put out books that go with your speaking ministry, and you already have a brand, you need to figure out, how do I make my books look like they belong with me, so that after I speak and I go stand at my book table, these books look like they're part of my brand. I work with some authors, several, that are publishing multiple books. And so I had to come up with a brand strategy for what elements are going to be on every single one of your books that make it so that when we're all lined up, you can tell, oh, that goes with that author. And that's with fiction. I've done some where I'm coming up with a plan for, how we're going to do multiple series of books. Some authors want to break the rules. That's okay. They get to do that. They aren't going to, maybe we're keeping one thing consistent. The font is the only thing consistent, but they have a different idea for each cover concept. That's up to them. But then I have some that are really like careful. I want my colors and I want like this particular thing. I have a book 2 and a book 3 in mind, and I want them to all look like they're part of a series. So all of that branding is something that if you're not sure, how can I make these things all fit together, you might have to have a professional who's working with you on that longer range plan. Now, this is just a few things, but when you're saying I can do it myself, those are some questions that you can ask yourself. So what I want you to do is identify, after you've listened today, where is it that you feel like you're most secure in the things you can do yourself? List out some of the things. So as you're looking at, think about editing. We always hire somebody to do. So even if it's bartering, you're going to hire somebody to do the editing. But whether it's the cover or the interior or the ebook, or some of your marketing, or the getting it online, like maybe you can get right up to that. And then you're like, oh, I don't know how to get it on KDP. And they're asking me for metadata. What in the world is metadata? So then it's like, identify where it is in the steps that you feel like you have some gaps. And then identify the things that you think you could realistically develop those skills, or the things that you need to hire somebody else. And when you have figured that out, then you are ready to start the plan. Because as we start looking at all the different steps that go into publishing a book, you're going to need to know which ones you're doing yourself and which ones you're hiring for somebody else, or hiring somebody else to do. All right, so can you do it all yourself? Maybe, but I'm going to let you ask that question. Where are your gaps? And what are the things you're going to fill in with somebody else? All right. We're going to be getting into the nitty-gritty of what steps we do and some of the things that you have to do now in the publishing process. So that is coming up in the future episodes. We've covered a lot of the business side, and so now we're going to get into the publishing side. So I'll see you in the next episode when we get into some of those things.